Would you explain aperture, shutter, and ISO?
Okay, sure. Okay, let's start with what may be the most misunderstood. There are f-stops. And f-stops are a measurement of the aperture, which the lens has an aperture. Basically, it's a hole. It's leaves, so it creates a hole, which lets light in. The smaller the hole, smaller the aperture, the larger the number. So f16, f22. The bigger that gets, it's like 5.6 or f4, or even f2.8. So that's one way to adjust how much light gets to the sensor. Shutter speed is the other part of that equation. And the shutter speed is the shutter, which is in the camera, is how fast the shutter is open. The faster shutter speed is like 1/1000th. The slower ones are like 1 second. The larger the aperture, the faster the shutter speed would be, and the smaller the aperture, the slower the shutter speed would be.
To get the same exposure
To get the
to
same
the sensor.
exposure, yeah. So let's put that in practical application. If you wanted, let's say, a shallow depth of field so that you get a person or something in focus, like the flower, and you want the background to be blurred, you would use a large aperture, which is like an f4 f-stop.
Or F2 even, right?
Or even f2.8 or 2 if your lens has that. If you want to do something like stop action in sports, well, you may have a fast shutter speed like 1/1000th. So the faster the shutter speed, which lets light in for the least amount of time, you need to have the aperture larger, which is a smaller number, f-stop.
Great.
And how ISO figures into that is, ISO is just a measurement of the sensitivity of the chip to light. And like all things, there's trade-offs. So if you have an ISO of 100, you need to have, for all to have the same amount of light in this equation, you would need to have either a slower shutter speed and or a larger aperture, which is a smaller f-stop. So in other words, the less light you have, as it gets darker, you would need to increase that ISO up to 400 or 1600 so that you still get a good exposure. But what happens is then you get more noise in the image. Still is similar to film because when you had ISO 100 speed film, it had less grain than the 400 or 1600 rated film. With the digital cameras and the ISO settings, they're getting better and better to where 1600 can still be usable, especially if you got to have it. Whereas, so it still doesn't look too bad. And
in film, that'd be like huge.
Yeah, in film it would be, you'd really see the grain.
And in film, you had to take out and change film, to change the ISO. Now we can do it.
Oh, yeah. Right, yeah.
Digitally.
Yeah, that's true.
Now it's set.
Yeah, you didn't have any choice.
And then would you mention wanting to take pictures of water so that the water looks blurry?
Yeah, like on a waterfall or water going over rocks. So the best thing would be to have a tripod, if possible. And so then you would have a long shutter speed, like 1 second or 2 seconds, but then you may have to really stop down, which means go down to f16 or f22, and or have have your ISO set down to 100 or so that you can get that long exposure.
You have three variables, right? The aperture, the shutter speed, and the ISO, or sensitivity to the sensor.
Right.
and those all interwork together
Right.
like a triangle.
Yep. Yeah, especially with something like sunsets or waterfalls, that's good that you know how to do a manual exposure at that point, because then you can keep changing the shutter speed and the f-stop combination to get how much blur you want in the water.
One more thing, if you talk about this is a little hard to understand, but the color temperature. I remember Kramer walking into a room and going, there are 3 different color temperatures here, because there are 3 different, there was sunlight coming in, fluorescent, and that's at least a concept, a little more advanced, but probably worth learning if you want to really enjoy photography.
Yeah, let's see if I can put that in just practical terms. Sunlight, all light has a color temperature, which is measured in Kelvin degrees. Now, I can explain to you what that is, but that wouldn't mean anything to you. But the thing to remember is all different lights have a different color. Now, our eyes see everything as one color, but film and digital cameras don't. They're more sensitive to the actual color. So, like today, we have sunshine and blue sky. Is in the shade. Okay, we got everything. We got the sunlight. That's lit up by the sun. What is the shade lit by? It's lit by the sky, which is blue. It doesn't have sunlight on it. It's getting light from the blue sky. So the shadows will have a blue tint.
Oh, okay.
Now, you mentioned the green leaves. Sun shining through green leaves will put a green tint on things. But just straight sun shining on something is that would be considered the normal color temperature, sunlight.
So sunsets, notoriously, what happens is they take the picture and it never looks as good as a sunset.
Mm.
And that's because the camera's trying to convert it back to white light with the auto.
Yeah, it's doing a couple things there. One, it's trying to it's trying to underexpose because of the bright sunlight. So you get a too dark picture. And it's trying to convert that warm orangey light back to neutral. So it's overcompensating by adding more blue to it.
And the way to adjust that would be to take it off the auto color temperature or put it on the scenic mode called sunset. It's kind of a cheat, right?
Yeah, right. On your camera, I can even show you this now. On your menu, I'll get it set up and then it's called white balance. And I have it set on auto right now. Let's see. Okay, I'm doing this backwards. Okay. But see, then you got incandescent, which is regular household light bulbs. It's much warmer light than sunlight. So that's why if you ever take a picture in the house and it's set on like sunlight, people are going to look yellowy or red. Fluorescents are notoriously green light, and it's not very pleasing. So people lit by fluorescents, unless you have it on fluorescent setting, are not going to look too good. You got direct sunlight, flash and direct sunlight are very close to being the same.
Cloudy,
a day is going to be more of a blue tint. Same thing with shade. And what else we got here? Or you can choose, you can play around and choose your own color temperature and get, you can just change the color of the scene if you want to make it a little warmer, especially for sunsets or in the woods. And if you wanted to, like for fall color, if you wanted to exaggerate the color, you could change the color temp. But that's the good thing about digital cameras. You can see what's happening
real time
after you take the picture, and you can adjust it.
Exposure compensation. Would you mention a little bit about that? I'll wrap it up. Because it's trying to meter to an average world, right?
Right,
Or what we used to call, I guess, close to 18% gray.
right. And 18% gray is just. In fact, when I went to school, we had to buy a gray card, which was 18% gray, which is a neutral gray. It's in the middle of from black to white. And what the camera does on auto is it's always trying to make everything according to that neutral gray. So as if there was a neutral gray card in the scene, and if it's getting blue light on it, it's going to warm everything up. Or if it's like really bright, it's going to darken it down to where that brightness is neutral gray.
So exposure compensation.
And exposure compensation is, like on my camera, is just a simple matter of, well, I'm going to show you how to do it, then I'll talk about it. It's just pushing this button and then see the 0, 0. Oh, this one. That's plus third stop, plus 2/3 stop. That's a stop, and it can continue on. But plus is adding more light to the exposure. So if your exposure is coming out too dark, you can add more light. Minus or negative is making it a darker exposure. And it's probably adjusting the shutter speed. Well, if you're on aperture priority, which is you set the f-stop you want, and the camera adjusts the shutter speed. And that's what I use more often, either that or manual.
And then the button usually looks like a plus or minus. Right. You can see it there.
Yeah.
See it? That's how you know. That's your exposure compensation setting.
So, you push the button and then this is just for my camera. You just turn the wheel. I have another camera where I actually have to go into the menu and change it.
And so that'd be like you showed us with a flower. It sees the flower real close up and it goes, oh, and it'll look like washed out or too bright. And you might want to turn it down for a close up so you get the rich colors of a flower.
Right.
So just trial and error with it. But especially if you take the picture and it looks like too much light, often I'll be turning it down a little bit.
Yes.
If it goes to pure white or to pure dark, you can't recover it in Photoshop.
Right, that's right. Now, if you're not too far off, you can.
Usually just yank the levels down.
Yeah, in Lightroom and Photoshop, you can still get back to a good point, but if you're too far, you can't. You just start looking really weird.
We're about time. Any closing questions or anything of our first Google photo walk? Did you have fun?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Cool. Thanks, Charles,
thank you for your time.
being our guide and helping us. And how can people find you online?
CharlesRegister.com.
Cool.
Cool.
Excellent. Thanks.